What happened to Tyrek Lannister? He went missing in the King's Landing riots, but where is he? Is he even still alive? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher, this is the place for you. Welcome. The disappearance of Tyrek Lannister is one of the most long-standing mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire, though he himself remains a bit of a blank slate. Not exactly the most well-rounded of George R.R. Martin's many characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, intentionally, I suspect. He is the son of Tyget and Darlessa Lannister, so cousin to Cersei, Jaime and Tyrion. But we don't get much of a description of him, other than that of a typical Lannister physically, so good-looking with curly blonde hair. Born in 286, he is therefore about 13 years old at the time of A Clash of Kings. He had seemingly been in King's Landing for a few years by that point, as a squire to Robert Baratheon. King Robert had two squires, Lancel Lannister and Tyrek, surrounded by Lannisters. We obviously know Lancel's significant role in supplying copious amounts of wine to the king on a hunt, but Tyrek was also there, close to the king at that time. We'll come back to that. To be honest, he's actually rather anonymous in Book 1, only mentioned by name in the appendices. But when we get to A Clash of Kings, he starts to come more to the fore. The Lannisters are working to cement their place as the preeminent noble family in the realm, even though technically they are still clinging to the idea that Joffrey was king because his father was Robert Baratheon. Part of this political effort is to marry off minor members of the Lannister clan to noble houses in the Riverlands and Crownlands, particularly those who had lost ruling lords and the like in the war. Hence Tyrek being engaged to, then married to, Lady Ermesand Hayford, the heir and last in line to House Hayford, a small but notable house in the Crownlands, not too far from King's Landing. It's all rather straightforward power politics. It puts a Lannister as ruling lord and helps them control that small part of the Seven Kingdoms. Jenna Lannister was already married to Emmon Frey, who was later given Riverrun, Lancel was named Lord Darry, and so on. The twist is that Lady Ermesand Hayford is still a baby, maybe just 1 year old, which leads to much teasing of Tyrek and hilarity among the Lannister courtiers and squires, calling Tyrek her wet nurse and inquiring what kind of swaddling clothes she wore on their wedding night. You get the idea. This was a political marriage of the most cynical kind. Tyrek and the Lannisters were now de facto lords of House Hayford, a promotion for Tyrek, but not one he seemed particularly pleased about. Still, this is Westeros and there was a wedding, so a feast to celebrate. Now, Tyrek's wedding and the associated partying in the Red Keep did not go unnoticed by the small folk in King's Landing, some of whom decided that they should party too, coming up to the Red Keep to ask for a share in the food and frivolity. Joffrey led a sortie on horseback to disperse them. He seemed to see it as a sort of sport to ride out and beat back the small folk. Joffrey really was... well, anyway... Tyrek had not been married long before his cousin Tyrion, as acting hand of the king, decided to send Princess Myrcella to Dorne in a marriage pact to Trystane Martell. There's obviously a whole history there with the Lannisters and Martells, but this was part of Tyrion's attempt to ensure the Martells didn't make the most of the Civil War to turn on the Lannisters. And it kind of worked in the short term, inasmuch as the Martells pursued their objectives more by stealth and through Oberyn than by outright war. The important point here, though, is that Myrcella leaving to go to Dorne is a big event in King's Landing. For the first time in ages, and certainly the first since the war started, the whole court in King's Landing ventured out en masse from the Red Keep into the city proper. Most of the 1% of King's Landing here heads down to the dock to bid her farewell. Innocuous, you might think, but the timing couldn't have been worse. The war is in full swing, the Riverlands are ablaze, and refugees are flooding into the city. At the same time, Stannis has established a sea blockade in the Gullet. Food from the Reach, the breadbasket of the Seven Kingdoms, is also pretty non-existent in King's Landing. The Reach obviously support Renly. An increased population, along with a reduction in food available, while the 1% were having their parties and feasts in the Red Keep to celebrate the wedding of a baby to a random Lannister squire, I think you can guess what the mood was among the small folk when the denizens of the Red Keep, still well-fed and richly dressed, headed en masse down to the docks and back to bid Myrcella farewell. As the court is heading back to the Red Keep, a woman steps out of the crowd with a dead baby in her arms. Heartbreaking, surely. Sansa shows some sympathy, but Joffrey does not. Someone throws mud at Cersei. Joffrey sends the Hound out into the crowd to find the offender, rather heavy-handedly, causing outcries. Mandan Moore cuts off the hand of someone who touches Joffrey's leg. It all kicks off. The royal party hurry back to the Red Keep and order the Gold Cloaks to quell the rioters. Some people are pulled from their horses. Most escape, but swords are drawn, punches are thrown, buildings set afire. Basically, things escalate. It takes a while, but the riot is put down and the cost is counted. The High Septon was pulled from his horse, his crystal crown stolen, and he was killed, as was Sir Preston Greenfield, a member of the Kingsguard, and Sir Aaron Santagar, the Master-at-Arms in the Red Keep. Lollis Stokeworth survived, but was assaulted multiple times. Hers is a sad story. Sansa Stark narrowly avoided the same fate, rescued by the Hound. 9 gold cloaks are lost. Unreported, but probably huge, are the numbers of small folk lost and homes burned down. And amid all that chaos, Tyrek Lannister also goes missing. In truth, this was probably the thing that bothered the Lannisters the most. High Septons and members of the Kingsguard can be replaced, minor nobles matter little, but a Lannister, that's different. Tyrion and Tywin both in turn try to find him, or evidence of what happened to him, to no avail. He just disappeared. We never hear from him again. So, what happened to Tyrek Lannister? Well, let's start with the boring but very possible answer first. He was pulled from his horse, attacked by the small folk, and killed. That's what happened to several other members of the party on their return to the Red Keep. His undoubtedly rich clothes and personal effects were ripped from him, and his body left lying somewhere in the city, and got lost amid the confusion and fire and many other dead bodies. He was still a Lannister, though, and very obviously one with his golden hair, and the Gold Cloaks were very clearly searching for him afterwards, so perhaps whoever did it, or whoever owned the property outside of which his body ended up, disposed of it somewhere. Everyone knew that the Lannisters paid their debts, and no one would want to be held accountable for what happened to Tyrek. Just get rid of the body and move on. It all makes sense. So that's the boring answer. He was just another victim of the riots. But what if he wasn't? What if there was something deeper going on? Unlike many A Song of Ice and Fire mysteries, there really is only one broad fan theory out there with any significant support to challenge this boring likelihood that Tyrek was just another victim of the riots, and that's that Varys kidnapped him. The primary accuser in this is actually Jaime. He visits Hayford and is presented with the young Lady Hayford. He finds himself wondering what happened to Tyrek. Adam Marbrand, later commander of the Gold Cloaks, tells him, "I led a search myself at Lord Tywin's command, but I found no more than Bywater had before me. The boy was last seen a horse, when the press of the mob broke the line of Gold Cloaks. Afterward, well, his palfrey was found, but not the rider. Most like they pulled him down and slew him. But if that's so, where is his body? The mob let the other corpses lie, why not his?" Jaime's initial conclusion here is actually the same as our initial conclusion. He thinks, if they realised whom they killed, no doubt they threw him in the river for fear of my father's wrath. They know the taste of that in King's Landing. Lord Tywin always paid his debts. But then he thinks again. Yet afterward, alone in the tower room he had been offered for the night, Jaime found himself wondering. Tyrek had served King Robert as a squire, side by side with Lancel. Knowledge could be more valuable than gold, more deadly than a dagger. It was Varys he thought of then, smiling and smelling of lavender. The eunuch had agents and informers all over the city. It would have been a simple matter for him to arrange to have Tyrek snatched during the confusion, provided he knew beforehand that the mob was like to riot, and Varys knew all, or so he would have us believe. Yet he gave Cersei no warning of that riot, nor did he ride down to the ships to see Myrcella off. All of which makes a lot of sense. Varys definitely would have known that a riot was possible, and he said nothing. Given that we now know that Varys has other loyalties, to young Griff, who at the time is still gathering support in Essos, this is actually not a surprise. He was wanting to weaken the Lannister regime as much as possible in advance of young Griff's invasion. Of course, that doesn't mean he also used it as cover for an abduction of Tyrek. So why might he? Varys has a history of using his dark arts to remove competent people from the defence of King's Landing. Think of Kevan Lannister and how he found a way for Tyrion to escape, and also to recruit those people to his own side. He sent Tyrion to his friend Illyrio, and, I would argue, subtly pushed Sir Barristan that way too. But Tyrek was barely a teenager. He can hardly be described as a competent defender of King's Landing, so maybe there's another motivation. We often talk about the Iron Throne's debt to the Iron Bank, which is significant. So significant that they, the Iron Bank, are now actively supporting a rival to the throne so they can get their money back. But the Iron Throne's bigger debt is to Casterly Rock. Witness this exchange between Littlefinger and Ned Stark when Ned was Hand of the King. "You know as well as I that the treasury has been empty for years. I shall have to borrow the money. No doubt the Lannisters will be accommodating. We owe Lord Tywin some 3 million dragons at present. What matter another 100,000? Ned was stunned. "Are you claiming that the crown is 3 million gold pieces in debt?" "The crown is more than 6 million gold pieces in debt, Lord Stark. The Lannisters are the biggest part of it." So the Iron Throne is in debt to the Iron Bank, but probably several times more in debt to the Lannisters. Any reasonable accession plan for young Griff would have to include an understanding with Casterly Rock over that debt. Varys is a very clever person who has had many years to come up with a plan for how to deal with that debt, and the obvious answer is to have someone on his side installed in Casterly Rock and ready to either forgive that debt or be content to let it drag on in favourable terms. At which point, we should probably briefly dip into the Lannister family tree, because although I've rather blithely been calling Tyrek a rather minor member of the Lannister clan, war has a habit of pushing some people up the line of succession quite quickly. Get your genealogical nerd hats ready, because Tyrek is the firstborn son of Tyget, the fourthborn child of Tytos Lannister. Tytos' eldest, Tywin, inherited, so obviously his children and their children are next in line. Leaving Tyrek behind, depending on how you count it and your views on female inheritance, Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella, any children they might have, then maybe Cersei, Jaime, though he's excluded as he is Kingsguard, Tyrion, any children he might have, Kevan, the second-born son of Tytos, then his children Lancel, Willem, Martin and Janai, then you get to Jenna, then Tyget and his children, so Tyrek first of those. As I said, these things are open to interpretation, but by my count, based on a very strict male-only inheritance line, that puts Tyrek at the start of this story as behind at least Joffrey, Tommen, Tyrion, Kevan, Lancel, Willem and Martin in the line of succession, at best 8th in line. And if any of those have male children, they will also leapfrog Tyrek. And there may well be some women who might want to challenge that rather male-heavy presumption of inheritance. Cersei, perhaps. So Tyrek starts out a long way from having the keys to Casterly Rock, but let's see what happens during the story. And please note that I don't ascribe all or even most of these deaths and abdications to Varys, but war is war. Joffrey obviously dies at the Red Wedding without having any children. Tommen is also too young to have children, and many people suspect won't survive long. Myrcella is with the Martells, who hate the Lannisters, and many Westerosi won't accept her or anyone as queen anyway. Cersei will obviously need to be defeated in order for young Griff to take the throne. Jaime is a member of the Kingsguard, so has disavowed his claim. Tyrion is Tyrion, but Tywin certainly never wanted him to inherit. Kevan was killed by Varys. His son Lancel has joined the Faith big time, disavowing his claim. Willem was killed by the Karstarks, which makes Martin Lannister, Kevan's third-born son, the most likely current heir to Casterly Rock, and after him, Tyrek. Tyrek Lannister is portrayed as a minor Lannister, which he is at the start of the story, but we, and probably Varys, can now see that there is a very clear path for him to become Lord of Casterly Rock, and therefore adjudicator of what happens to that crown debt. Varys definitely has an interest in taking someone so young and impressionable, and someone who is probably also angry with the Lannisters for making him a laughingstock by marrying him to a baby. So it took a deep dive into the Lannister family tree and the crown finances to get there, but yes, Varys has a clear motive for capturing Tyrek, as well as means and opportunity. Does that mean that he did it? No, but at the risk of overinterpreting a throwaway remark by George R. R. Martin, he has said that we will find out later in the story what happened to Tyrek, which I can't see how we would if he were just a random victim of the riots. George R. R. Martin is also writing Jaime as an increasingly astute judge of character and circumstance, and he thinks that Varys' role here is very suspicious, so I think we should too. Perhaps Tyrek is just another victim of the riots. Perhaps he is now just a horse. I see you, Glidus, and appreciate you, but most likely I now think he was captured by Varys amid the confusion of the riots, which he personally avoided by not being there, and certainly knew about and may well have instigated. Not just, as Jaime suspects, because he might know the truth about Robert Baratheon's death, that now seems quite a long time ago in the plot, but because Varys needs someone sympathetic installed as chief holder of the crown's biggest debt for whenever young Griff comes to power, and leader of one of the Seven Kingdoms. If young Griff can conquer the Crownlands, and John Connington can deliver the Stormlands, and the Dornish come on side, and the Friends in the Reach turn out to be important, and with Tyrek the Westerlands pledge their support, that means a large portion of the continent might be supportive from day one. Varys has a plan, and is 2 steps ahead of most of the Seven Kingdoms. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos like this, there's a link to my playlist on the left of your screen now. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.